Welcome to the Line Movement MMA betting show. I'm Daniel Levy from Best Fight Picks and Half the Battle, joined now by Dan Tom of MMA Junkie and the Protect Your Neck podcast. Today, we're going to be talking UFC Vegas 18 because Alexander Volkov is taking on Alistair Overeem. It's a heavyweight showdown, Dan Tom. 5 rounds scheduled, but I have a feeling this one might not even see the fourth.
It's interesting, that's definitely could be a take here, but it is crazy because these are some of the more athletic heavyweights, even despite one of them's age and experience, which I'm sure we'll get to. But these are some very athletic, capable guys. So I feel like not just being heavyweight MMA, which is crazy enough, Dan, but I really do feel like this matchup could go in a lot of hypothetical ways.
It's interesting because I feel like we got to put a lot of emphasis on Volkov's last fight. Reason being, he gained 20 pounds for that fight. Now, he's never weighed in at the heavyweight limit before until that last fight against Walt Harris. He was 265. So on weigh-in day, I was like, shit, that's not good because this guy's a mover. He relies on his speed, being the lighter guy, moving around. But you know what, Dan Tom? It was actually an advantage because now he's sitting down on his punches finally. So I think we're seeing a different Volkov in this day and age at 265 pounds. I'm curious to see what he weighs in at on Friday. And for Overeem, I mean, what can you say about the guy? True legend of the heavyweight division. Might never touch UFC gold, but in my opinion, is an MMA Hall of Famer. Touched gold in a bunch of other different organizations. And if you don't show up with your A game against a guy like Alistair Overeem, he is going to embarrass you in a way that looks like it was straight out of a video game, Dan Tom.
You're exactly right. I mean, the vet lesson is a theme that whether you're betting on or siding with this card, it's something that is prevalent. You got to at least respect here. But I love that you brought up the point about, Volkov, Dan, being up 20 pounds. I went back to watch some of his Bellator matchups. I mean, he looks skinnier. He looks like a complete different guy, almost a guy that maybe could be cutting to, to 205. I mean, he was bulking up, the commentary said, just to get to 230 and 236. So a lot of similarities in a way, except maybe he's going about it maybe in a more smarter, conservative way, a more quieter way than the Reem went about his transformations, if you will. But yes, similar kind of tall guys that, it's time to bulk up and get with the deal here. And they both have had that approach. And it looked successful for Volkov. It had me worried maybe because I picked Harris. And I think I got every pick on that fight card right, except I went with my heart, Dan. I went with my heart with Walt Harris. And man, did Volkov look good. And something about that 20 pounds, which is interesting, is he already was the guy that had cardio. I don't think you could really be too suspect if you're throwing, darts at Volkov's game in the cardio department. But the fact that like he's bulking up and still, and I think I shared this with on Twitter with that Clint fellow from Die Hard MMA podcast. Shouts to him. That if you look at Volkov's training, he's actually been stepping up the running. So you think that would be counterintuitive to him bulking up in size. But it's good, right? Because you want to see a guy, if he is putting, some more emphasis on the weights, you got to balance it out with cardio, right, Dan? So it looks like Volkov's he looks like he's checking those tick boxes and taking the right steps, whether you're siding with him or not here. That's a good sign for Volkov.
Yeah, I mean, whatever his new strength and conditioning program or his new nutritionist, whatever they have him doing, keep doing it because it's working. And you bring up a great point and a bit of a history lesson. I feel like a lot of the newer fans don't even have a damn clue that Overeem was once a 205er because you look at that physique he had against Brock Lesnar, Ubereem, as they like to say, Dan Tom. And it's just a completely different guy than the one we saw in Pride fighting Shogun or even Vitor Belfort, by the way. So, yeah, a true transformation for Overeem. And same thing for Volkov. And it's funny because you mentioned how you were on Harris. And, man, I made a mistake that I'll never make again. So I picked Volkov on the show here with you and Eric Nixick. I said, this is a bad matchup for Walt Harris. But then at the weigh-ins, Walt was in the best shape of his life. And it's funny because if you look at Walt's history, when he weighs above 260, he usually loses. When he weighs between 250 and 258, that's when he has his best performances. He comes in about 255. So I'm like, oh shit, Walt is in the shape of his life. And Volkov comes in 265. I'm like, he's 20 pounds heavier than usual. So we got the best Walt Harris versus maybe a little bit of a bit of a heavier Volkov. Turns out that wasn't the case at all because this new heavy Volkov I like what I'm seeing. And maybe that was the missing element that can take him to title contention, because he was always, a top 10, top 5 guy, right? He's been in there competing with the best guys in the heavyweight division since he joined the UFC. But now I think he's ready to make that leap to the top 3. And maybe this weight, him sitting down on his punches, will show that that's actually the case.
Yeah, definitely. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him, come through here. Nor am I surprised that, by the way, this is, the Line Movement MMA betting show. Like, subscribe below. But it also doesn't surprise me that he was opened as a slight underdog and was steamed. And not that doesn't surprise me as underdog price, but we could even be getting a Volkov as being bet up to a near 2-1 favorite, depending on what the public's feeling, Dan, by the time of fight time, right? And I find it interesting because I'm a believer in Volkov, and I know we can poke holes at that resume game. And if he loses against Overeem, I think a lot of people are going to do that to Volkov fairly or unfairly, right? However, I've been on my styles kick, and I've been really looking at the cage trends. And even though we've been a bit off, because again, I don't blame you, and no one should blame anybody for thinking a guy in 2020 coming in 20 pounds heavy is not a flag because of the pandemic fight camps, right? Everyone wasn't getting the best fight camps. We maybe thought that was the case with Volkov, but something across the board as far as that trend goes is strength and conditioning. Guys have only been doing better, whether it was their strength and it's only stronger, or they were suspect in it and they're like outperforming. I think that's been kind of a common trend throughout this pandemic, which makes sense. If you're limited on sparring partners, you got more time to focus on yourself, right? So I don't doubt that either of these guys are coming in the best shape. However, I am going to side with the now underdog Overeem, Dan, just because basically it's in the small cage. And I feel like Overeem, who is, by the way, 2-0, and not in his last 2 fights, but 2-0 in the Apex, whereas the only time Volkov's been in the small cage in quite some time, even since before Bellator, right? He lost his fight. Granted, that was a terrible Styles matchup against Curtis Blades. And I know Overeem does not have the same double as Curtis Blades. Overeem doesn't even have as clean of a single as a old Fabricio Verdum. His singles are ugly, kind of, and they're not technically appropriate. But if you look at the ones that Overeem has been hitting against the cage, as well as the trip takedowns and other things that he has and has always had, he's really good at using that momentum, real vet savvy, using that momentum. And Alexander Volkov, traditionally, and even this improved version, he's not the hardest guy to push back. And even though his clinch game is improved, particularly in his takedown defense and scrambling, I still like Overeem's chances, even if he can't get this fight to the ground. If he can, he's more of a positional player than Verdum. He has more ground and pound than Verdum. And I know he got out grounded pounded by Curtis Blades, but MMA math's a funny thing. Be careful, folks. Alistair Overeem is one of the best ground and pounders in heavyweight MMA because he is the best heavyweight MMA clinch fighter, even at this advanced age, because of his wrist control. So, Dan, even if he can't get him to the ground, and I'm giving Volkov a lot of credit, I don't think he's going to be like insta-subbed or insta-TKO. Volkov's got plenty of fight in him. But even if this fight just stays in the clinch, I don't know if I like Volkov's chances against like the best heavyweight clinch fighter in MMA. That small cage is going to give way to a lot of it. And Reem, even though his chin has always been suspect, let's face it, dropped or stopped in 10 of his last 18. He's one of the few guys who Volkov's not going to have that outlasting athletic edge like Verdum, where it's like, yeah, Verdum's going to be scary, but as long as I survive the early storms, I can pull away. Like that's Volkov's kind of plan with his durability and his cardio. He's not really going to have that here, at least for the cardio. Can Volkov win, Dan? Absolutely, but I'm going to go with the dog here.
I don't think it's a bad pick. I mean, I think that Overeem can win any fight at heavyweight. I think that he's one of the best guys on planet Earth and one of the most skilled, one of the most well-rounded. I mean, he's offensively speaking, he's got everything, Dan Tom. I mean, the striking, you already know the credentials. You know that back in the day, he actually, I don't want to fuck this up, but he choked out Vitor Belfort, right? With a guillotine.
Yeah, guillotine. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Choked out Vitor Belfort with a guillotine. All the knockout wins. I mean, the guy can go the distance too, and he's getting better with age. It's just, he's a heavyweight. His chin isn't the best. And this guy, Volkov, although he's been known as a point fighter, like I said, his last fight, he's sitting down on those strikes. And something I really like about Volkov is that we're not dealing with a young up-and-comer like Sakai who doesn't quite have the seasoning, or, all these other guys that Overeem's been fighting that aren't quite ready to take that step up, like Pavlovich, for example. But I think that Volkov, I mean, when you look at his record, he's had 40 pro fights, Dan Tom. So this isn't some young up and comer that needs to be given a tour of the octagon and then he's going to come back better. This guy's in his prime right now. And I don't know if there's any truth to this, but I've been hearing from a lot of different sources, and don't quote me on this because I could be way off, but I've been hearing that this might be Overeem's last fight. I don't know if that's true or not. So, if he loses and then comes back, just don't you didn't hear it here, you know what I mean, Dan Tom? But I've been hearing it might be his last fight. I know Volkov still got another title run in him. I think he keeps his distance. I think he keeps it long. And like I said, what I like about him is he doesn't rush things. He doesn't, go out there, blow his load, then have nothing left. He eases into the fight. That's why, you know how many takedowns Curtis Blades landed on him, Dan Tom? 14. That's why after, maybe 10 of those, the guy's still fighting back. He even landed a takedown of his own in the later rounds, even won the fourth and fifth on a couple of judges' scorecards. So I think this guy has the goods to go all five. And as much as I respect Overeem, and obviously he's got a path against anyone at heavyweight, he's one of the best of all time. I'm going to go with Volkov here to catch him somewhere along the way. Not sure how, but I'll go Volkov. Now, Dan Tom, next up in the co-main event of the evening in the bantamweight division, we got Corey the Sandman Sandhagen taking on the former, not bantamweight champion, not featherweight champion, the former lightweight champion, Dan Tom, the man that dethroned the great BJ Penn in Abu Dhabi, by the way, defeated him in the rematch in Boston at UFC 118. I'm talking about the great, the legendary Frankie the Answer Edgar. And I got to tell you this right off the bat, Dan Tom. He's in his right weight class finally. You know what I mean? This guy wins the belt in 2010 at 155 pounds, and that wasn't even his proper weight class. Drops to 45. That's not even his proper weight class. Now, finally, in 2021, the man is 39 years old, and now he's fighting in his proper weight class, Dan Tom. And I don't care who you score that Pedro Munoz fight for. You know why? Look, I had a huge bet on Munoz, and to me, it's not about, the judges got it right, the judges got it wrong, because I was thinking it was just going to be a wipeout. Oh, he's cutting weight this far, into his career, his age, this and that. Dude, he's eating the shots at 135 pounds perfectly fine. And that was actually something that I like to see. The reason why is because, look, I don't need to talk about Pedro Munoz striking defense. We all know Pedro Munoz eats a lot of shots. So Frankie Edgar was able to outpoint him. My whole question was, how does Frankie eat the shots? The same shots, Dan Tom, that knocked out Cody Garbrandt. The same shots, Dan Tom, that rocked Rob Font and made him shoot for a panic takedown against Pedro Munoz. Well, Frankie Edgar eats those shots for 5 straight rounds, doesn't get dropped once, doesn't get wobbled, ate him like a bantamweight. I think he's in his right weight class, Dan Tom. And honestly, look, I know on paper you see these two. If this fight's a pick 'em, you go Corey Sandhagen all day. But like, I know it's not 2017, but I'm kind of getting Frankie versus Yair vibes again, Dan Tom. Minus 450, Corey Sandhagen. What?
Man, Dan, I like where your tone's at, because I thought I was going to be coming in with this tone. Maybe we ended up in the right place. We'll see here very shortly, folks. Relax. But I don't think Dan is talking from the crazy house here. Not even just from a betting perspective. We can always make the argument from odds numbers, right, or statistics, and that's all fine. But we guys like me and you, Dan, we know that stuff's only shallow deep. You got to incorporate the big picture, right? And when the big picture comes out, it's not just about odds here. It's about styles, even something that I like to focus more on, right? Styles and even those intangibles. And I like that you gave the Abu Dhabi a shout, the original spoiler that is NJ all day. Frankie Edgar, Abu Dhabi's been good to him. But you know where else has been good to him, Dan? The UFC Apex, where he had that bantamweight debut. And I think that Frankie Edgar, and so would his camp, which is a very smart camp. Mark Henry still got it. You go back and listen to those rounds. Really good advice. They were really calling what Pedro was trying to do, regardless of whether you agree with the score. I was a 4-1 Munoz guy for what it's worth, but I could see it 3-2. And if you could see it 3-2 in MMA, you have to assume that a split is always on the table with hashtag MMA judging. So I'm definitely not going to relitigate that. Like you said, Dan, you have to take, especially from our position, you have to take the positives. We can't be crying over spilt milk. We have to go look at the evidence and see how we can use that for the future, right? And I think that small cage really does well. Kind of like, again, And not that it's a hard stamp, it's a heavyweight fight that we just broke down in the main event, folks. But again, stylistically, you got another guy who's coming off wins in the Apex in a smaller cage that seems to suit his style, especially where he's been going lately or traditionally, against a guy who his last loss comes against a similar stylistic threat, right? Regardless of whether or not the odds are giving it credit in the last place that they lost. So there's a lot to get over there. They're returning to the place of their last defeat, and they're returning to the place of the last defeat, knowing that they have to overcome a styles match. And I'm a huge Elevation Fight Team guy. I love the whole crew over there. Shout out to Sean Madden and everybody in between, the fighters and everything. Dan, this is even more so. I love Corey Sandhagen's attitude. I loved him since before he came to the UFC, interviewing him on Junkie Radio. I'm just always going to be a fan of that guy, but I got to be able to put that bias aside. And man, it's not just the number. Stylistically, I could see a spoiler potential too. And I was scared, even though I picked Frankie Edgar, Dan, to beat Yair. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried for Frankie, right? Because even then we were asking the questions: has the bottom fell out for Frankie yet? But seeing him, like you said, Dan, seeing him take those shots at bantamweight, kind of instilled my confidence. Seeing that he still had the speed. I know Pedro Munoz was the slower bantamweights, so be careful to hang your hat on that. But yes, Frankie did still look fast. He still had his reactions. His countering game was what was serving him the best, and that's kind of a good telltale sign as far as where a guy's speed's going. Again, folks, speed's going to be the first thing to drop, maybe even before Frankie's chin at this weight class. That's what you want to watch for. I liked what I saw, Dan, and I'm a big Sandhagen fan. He's got the calf kicks. He's shown improvements in throwing his calf kicks and the distancing. He has the most slickest uppercuts that I write about, both to the body, although going to the head's probably going to serve him better because anybody who throws a good uppercut is live against Frankie Edgar. We've seen it. Gray Maynard got him on skates, even though he couldn't get him out of there. Chan Sung Jung, Brian Ortega, so on, etc. But you also need some type of wrestling or scrambling ability like a Benson Henderson, and or a clinch game like a Benson Henderson, or a really mean front headlock game like Charles Oliveira, who, even though had that, Frankie still won and still took him down, by the way. But away, of course, he doesn't just have better takedown defense than Corey Sandhagen, which is fair to say. Nothing against Sandhagen, but Max also has a more of jiu-jitsu and counter wrestling threats, right? Whereas Sandhagen's threats is more, shouts to Ed Gallo, they're more anti-wrestling threats. They're more footwork and strike selection. And even though I like that footwork and strike selection, I'm not trying to write off Sandhagen. I get why he's the favorite. But to me, Dan, I feel like Sandhagen ultimately needs space to move. I feel like Sandhagen against anybody in the small cage, you got to be suspect about. But I picked Aljo against him for a reason, and I'm going to pick Frankie Edgar here.
Wow. Well, you said not to look too much into the stats. However, there's one stat that I have to look into. And I know people want me to bring up the output difference, and it's definitely there. But there's a stat that overrides the output difference, in my opinion, Dan Tom. You want to know what that is?
What's up?
Corey Sandhagen has 30% takedown defense. So if I know for a fact that Frankie Edgar is coming out here and shooting, then Corey's not a minus 450 favorite. If Frankie wants to come out here and, test his box, I mean, when I say test his boxing, I mean, we're talking about a legend here. We're talking about a Hall of Famer here. We're talking about, like I said, the guy that dethroned BJ Penn. It's not really about testing his boxing. It's more so that Sandhagen's got insane output. He's massive for the weight class. He switches stances. He's got such a wide variety of strikes. His arsenal is seriously on point. So, Frankie probably gets outpointed in a stand-up fight here. But what happens if Frankie relies on that old school American wrestling and gets the shit to the mat? That's what I want to know, Dan Tom, because I can't confidently tell you that if Corey Sandhagen gets taken down more than once, that he's going to win this fight. Look, I think Corey should be favored, okay? I mean, we're talking about, he's over 10 years younger, the whole bit, people calling him a future champion. He's the output king. I get it. He should be favored. But where do we draw the line? I mean, at what point does it become disrespect? Because like I said, minus 450, Dan Tom. I mean, I some minus 430s, minus 410s, minus 400, but still, just because he knocked out Marlon Moraes, who, I mean, I think we can all agree at this point, it's Henry Cejudo took Marlon Moraes' soul. I mean, look,
Yeah.
Marlon Moraes was the scary guy at 135 pounds. Then he fights Cejudo. All of a sudden, everyone thought he lost to Aldo. Then he gets knocked out by Sandhagen. Then he gets knocked out by Rob Font. I think it's safe to say that Marlon Moraes has exited the building, whereas I can't say the same thing about Frankie Edgar, dude. I mean, I got to bring up the same answer that the answer, right? That's his nickname. I got to bring up the same point I brought up earlier, man. I mean, those same shots Frankie Edgar ate across 5 rounds were the same shots that knocked out Cody Garbrandt and hurt Rob Font enough to shoot, which is uncharacteristic for Rob Font. For Rob Font to shoot against the guy with the best guillotine in the division, holy shit, he must have been hurt. And before someone sits here and says, oh, but Cody Garbrandt's got a glass chin. That's what you guys were saying about Frankie Edgar one fight ago. So I don't think that's the case with Frankie, man. So look, I'm gonna go with Sandhagen as a pure pick, but at the betting window, and I could be off. Watch Sandhagen come out here, look like Pablo Picasso, paint a masterpiece, and get rid of him early. Maybe that happens. I'm not writing off the possibility. He's a minus 400 favorite, but what I think before the fact is that the pick is Sandhagen, but this is a 100% dogger pass situation at the betting window. And I don't fault anyone for taking a shot at Frankie at these odds. He's got wins over taller men like this. He beat Charles Oliveira. He beat Yair Rodriguez. He went the distance with Max Holloway. Like, he's been in there with guys that are bigger than Corey Sandhagen, guys that are better than Corey Sandhagen. Before someone says, oh, but that wasn't the Charles Oliveira we see today. Yeah, but it's not like Charles Oliveira was some bum back then. Charles Oliveira was still the man. It's just now, Charles Oliveira was a top 15 guy back then. Now he's a top 3 guy. Top 15 is still pretty fucking good, Dan Tom. So I ain't discrediting those wins at all. You won't catch me dead discrediting those wins. But I thought Frankie was on his way out, but the reality was he was just in the wrong weight class, man. And I think 135 is his weight class. So I think he's going to have some success here. I wish I had a crystal ball to know if he's going to get takedowns or not. Because if he gets takedowns, I think the odds dramatically shift in his favor. I don't think Corey looks minus 400 if Frankie gets takedowns here. If Frankie doesn't get takedowns here, however, I see Corey with the reach advantage. And let me say about the reach advantage. Frankie's got a deceptively long reach for a 5'6" man. Yeah. And I know sometimes it's listed at 68 inches, but I know my boy Dan Tom remembers damn well back in the day when it was listed at 72 inches. Just like they mess up the Jake Ellenberger height, they mess up the Frankie Edgar reach. So I'm rolling with this guy's got a 72-inch reach. So let's see if he can close the distance. I'm going to pick Corey. Look, I think he's favored for a reason, but dogger pass, Dan Tom.
It's funny, they did the 72 to 68-inch reach on BJ too as well, the guy he dethroned. So it was something with the stats era. If you're of that class, you got your stats just washed. You're like, sorry, son. Tinder height, Tinder reach is out of there. But I love that all those points, man. And you're right, takedowns are going to be the key. I will say this. I'm not condemning, nor should you, Sandhagen based off the Aljamain performance. I know I'm citing it for a stylistic thing, but if you look at the technique Aljamain used, he would have put anybody away that night. Sandhagen is a legit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt. Of course, fighters are going to say they never got to feel like they got into the fight when they get finished early. We saw it with Dan Hooker, respectfully, when he got knocked out from Chandler. It's like the worst part. They always say it's like they feel like they didn't get to fight against a real legit back taker, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, MMA grappler, Rafael Assunção. Corey Sandhagen showed amazing scrambling, right? So I believe that the truth lies somewhere in between. I do believe that he's better than what he showed against Aljamain. This is just a stylistic pick, and even in his good performance against another older fighter, right? Assunção was able to get takedowns off of cock kicks. That is Frankie Edgar's specialty. And again, Sandhagen, he can get taken down. His statistics 30%, Dan. That's actually pretty accurate. He doesn't have great takedown defense. It's his scrambling ability that saves them. The problem is, though, even though, like you said, he's been able to beat the tall guys. You cited the Oliveiras of the world and so on. Well, let's look at the tall guys he lost to. First of all, they were world champions, and in some of them close fights that could have gone his way against Benson Henderson, or a loss against another world champion against Max Holloway. Frankie Edgar was still able to take those guys down. But Benson Henderson being good against the cage, or Max Holloway being good against the cage, they don't give their back. They always kind of regard, butterfly, make space, protect their neck, and get up the smart way. Sandhagen tripods. And that's kind of why I picked him against Aljo, because Aljo, like Edgar, a wrestler, not just a wrestler, but a wrestler who's BJJ black belt level, which Edgar is, that can take backs or work from the front headlock or hit mat returns, like it's going to be a la carte every time he tripods. So it's these things. I'm not writing off Sandhagen. It's a stylistic fit, folks. And I don't disagree with anything Dan said. However, I will be picking Edgar, which probably means, especially if I'm going by my man's logic over here, I should be going to the betting window as well based off principle at these odds. And I'm not saying that I won't, but I do like both guys.
Yeah, I mean, listen, price is everything, right? So let's see what happens. I'll be rooting for you to win that one for sure. Now, Dan Tom, featured bout, we got Alexandre Pantoja welcoming Manel Kape to the UFC. And Manel Kape, obviously, he was doing his thing over in Ryzen. The guy's a stud. He's a beast knockout artist. But Dan Tom, as we like to say, welcome to the UFC, young man, because this ain't he ain't getting some easy fight to let him get his feet wet and to kind of ease into the flyweight division. They're like, oh, so you're the real deal? Well, here's a top 5 guy, right off the bat. And Pantoja, the cannibal, I mean, what can we say about this guy? One of the only men to eat the shots from Davison Figueiredo. Great black belt. He's got knockout power too. As tough as they come, experienced. Can't say enough good things about Pantoja. And Manel, obviously, he's going to get a lot of UFC knockouts. Like if they would have done Manel Kape versus Matt Schnell for his UFC debut, I think we're looking at a first round knockout. But this is a little bit different. So to me, it comes down to Pantoja's approach here. Does Pantoja want to brawl, which he does a lot, Dan Tom? Pantoja loves a good brawl. And I'm not saying he can't have success in the brawl. But what I am saying, Dan Tom, is why give this guy a chance to win? Why even, play where it might be 50-50 when you can just take this guy to the mat and you have such a significant advantage to the point where one back take and the fight might be over shortly after, Dan Tom. So I think I agree with Pantoja being favored. It's just I wish I had some insight to the game plan here. Well, are you gonna make this easy on yourself or not, big guy?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Everybody knows I'm a Pantoja fan, so I obviously don't disagree with him being favored here. Spoiler alert: I will be picking him, but I do have the same hesitance that Dan is mentioning here because it's worth mentioning at least Manel Kape's game. This guy, he looks like a wrestle boxer, but even though he doesn't list his creds on his UFC bio, it looks like he recently got a brown belt. It looks like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which makes sense because he's a very willing grappler, which I don't like about him in this style matchup. That's the thing. Like, when he gets hurt, it's good. He's got really good reactive shots. Almost like when he gets hurt and rocked, he has better reactive shots than when he's doing it soberly. But either way, I don't like how willing he is as a grappler, especially when his strength is boxing. Like you said, the guy's knockout power is insane, and it's not just like athleticism or anything like that, folks. Like his dad, I'm not a boxing aficionado, but he's apparently like a very accomplished world championship boxer, and he grew up boxing with his dad since like 4 years old.
Wow.
And you can kind of see that because he's got one of those like Chris Lytle, like those earlier boxers that came to MMA where they were almost too confident, Dan. You know what I'm saying? Where they have, and you still see that with a lot of them today. They have the low hands, or even not even boxing, just like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. It's almost like the confidence of growing up doing combat sports. You feel so above your contemporaries when you get to the MMA striking, right? In a lot of cases they are, but you really got to be careful because even if you are like a Stephen Thompson of the world, you can still get clipped. No one's beyond that game, right? So you see a lot of that with Manel Kape. So like he can fight from southpaw, orthodox. He seems like he's got a natural feel, but if you're willing, fast, and technical enough, like a Horiguchi, like you can light him up all day, which is why he's still very culpable as well on the feet. He's just a wild man. It's hard to trust what he's going to do. He is young, so it makes sense. This is the age where you like to start seeing a fighter. At least I don't know about you, Dan, but for me, we watch these guys come up right at a certain point. You want to see him mature. But what's Kape been doing? I'm pretty sure he's had bookings that haven't fallen through. I've been bad about researching that. I just watched some of his fights and looked at his bio. But what has he been doing? He is more the intangible for change, whereas Pantoja, I don't know if I can trust him to wrestle. I don't blame people who don't. And even though Pantoja or Pantoja supporters, we love to hang our hat on the guy's durability. But even though I picked against Dan Hooker and I didn't expect him to be stopped, I expected him to be wrestled. I did warn that I said, Chandler's the less durable party on paper, but these guys like Hooker, you got to be worried about. It's the guys that just are in wars and don't go down who you got to worry about, because out of nowhere, and it's usually before they hit their cooking temp, they drop out, right? You got to watch that. And that could easily happen to Pantoja here. Or we could see another Davison Figueiredo, because this guy's just stupid athletic and he's got some skills, right? Manel Kape, right? That being said, I'm not just going to pick Pantoja here, Dan, because I like him. Kind of the similar analysis to the Sandhagen Frankie Edgar fight. Similar to Sandhagen, what I noticed with Manel Kape, not that he's just too willing to go for submissions and give up bottom, or he's too willing to just go for a takedown in general. It's that in these scrambles, he's always tripoding. And he hasn't faced like the best back takers every time, but against a guy like Pantoja, and I know I've counted on Pantoja to do this and fail, where I'm like, yeah, Pantoja, he can gas, but you know what? If he can just get the backpack position, even if he can't submit him, he can backpack and win the round. I'm scared to say that here, Dan, but I feel like Manel Kape style is totally going to invite that. So in other words, that even if Pantoja is being stubborn and wants to strike with this guy, I feel like Manel Kape is going to get Pantoja to grapple. So for that reason, I can't trust either, and I'll pick Pantoja.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because I understand the logic taking the shot on the dog. I mean, especially if Pantoja comes out here and brawls, which he tends to do a lot of the time. It's just that it really could only take one takedown, one transition on the mat for this to be in Pantoja's world, and he can control the fight from there on out. And I mean, it wasn't that long ago that I saw Sasaki out there, not just beating Manel Kape, Dan Tom, but thoroughly dominating him on the mat with takedowns like it was nothing. Like Sasaki was a guy that, I mean, he had a couple of moments in the UFC, but he wasn't hanging around in the UFC. And he dominated Manel Kape. And I know, yeah, Pantoja finished Sasaki in the first round. There's some MMA math there, but that's not the point I'm trying to bring up here. I'm just trying to say, man, no longer will he have tennis shoes on. He's not fighting in a ring anymore. The ref doesn't have an earpiece. Like I just can't do it, Dan Tom. I got to go Pantoja here to get it done. He's the more proven commodity. I like Manel Kape. I think he's going to come out here and knock a lot of people out. But to come into the UFC and immediately fight a top 5 guy, I mean, Chandler was ready. We picked Chandler for a reason. And let's see if Kape is ready. I was convinced Chandler was ready. I mean, he fucking beat Eddie Alvarez and Benson Henderson. Of course he was ready. I'm not quite sure yet about Kape. I need to see it to believe it. In terms of the top 5, that's what I mean, Dan Tom. I know he's going to win some fights in the UFC. I know he's legit. I know he hits like a truck. But we're talking about top 3, top 5 right now. So that's why you got to bring up everything. No stones left unturned. So I'll go with Pantoja here. Get this to the mat. I mean, you're a black belt. This guy's a white belt. So, I mean, he might be a blue or purple belt. Who knows? Yeah, I know he ain't no black belt like Pantoja. I'll tell you that right now, Dan Tom. So get this to the mat and you win the fight, Alexandre. So let's see what happens. Now, Dan Tom, next up in the featherweight division, we got Cody Stamann, and he's welcoming the newcomer Askar to the UFC. And this is not Askar Askarov. I did not mess up the name. This is a completely different guy, Askar, or Askar, whatever you want to say. He's 11-1 as a pro. This guy is no slouch. 11-1, very good record. He's also Palestinian, which means he's got a lot of pride. The guy fights with a lot of spirit. That being said, Dan Tom, the level of competition difference is just night and day, to a point where, I mean, Askar got knocked out one fight ago by some random 6-2 guy. This is going to be the only thing, though. The reason I'm not going to say this is going to be a rude awakening or, an ass whooping is because Cody Stamann doesn't really destroy anybody. He kind of just outpoints everybody. So this is going to be another Cody Stamann, 30-27 on 2 cards, 29-28 on the other. Kind of outpoint the guy, give him that vet lesson, give him that tour of the octagon, let him know, hey, welcome to the UFC. You're going to have a bright future, just not tonight. I'm going to go with Cody Stamann via decision here, Dan Tom.
Man, when you said Palestinian, I know this is a different group of people, so I'm not going to ignorantly cross over, but there is some truth to that, man. People from certain parts of the world really fight with a passion. Who's the gentleman I'm thinking of who also had a really ton of tough upbringing? He came up in the Middle East, CR Bahadurzada. I mean, you listen to hear that guy's stories growing up. I mean, dude, like walking through bodies and whatnot. And I remember I'm not going to derail this, but I went to college with a kid from Palestine, and boy, did it just really kind of open up my perspective of someone that grew up there. So when you say that, like, yeah, I'm not, if I see that next to someone's name, I don't doubt it. Of course, he is fighting out of Chicago, Illinois. Like from Chicago or New York, a lot of these big cities, they'll attract a lot of, a lot of foreigners, for lack of a better word. I don't mean a negative connotation. So don't be surprised. Don't be thrown off when you see these things. I admittedly have not done a deep dive on Askar. But when you talk about, fighting from a deep-seated reason, like, what about Cody Stamann, man? I mean, having to deal with, losing his brother, I believe, and kind of shelve that during the camp. And that happened during his last camp. So if you think that he got the proverbial Rocky demons out of his basement, I don't think so. And not just because whether you like Cody Stamann or whether you're sympathetic to his story outside or you like him as a fighter, regardless of both, right? I can tell you that there is a better version of Cody Stamann. You have to be expecting it for a while. He had a very neutralizing style. You're like, you've got all the skills there. Let's put more volume. Let's take this in a direction somewhere. And I think that's what he's been trying to do. I know he did some work with our guy, Eric Nixick, of course, friend of the show. Shout out to Eric over there at Extreme Couture. Cody's been definitely traveling. So regardless of what your picks, biases, or plays are, I do want to see just I know Cody's obviously is going to be my pick here. Obviously, he's favored to win. Obviously, we don't disagree with that. But I do want to see, and this is a perfect opportunity, maybe, it checks some boxes of that letdown spot, quote unquote, right? But I do want to see Cody go out there, take care of business, and kind of show what he's been working. And I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Now, Dan Tom, last but not least in the lightweight division, we got a rematch, 6 years in the making. And I know I said that last week when we were talking about Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor, which, by the way, shout out to the Diamond Dustin Poirier for going out there and knocking out Conor McGregor. Such a amazing moment in the sports history, one that we'll never forget, and honestly was very important too. But we'll talk about that another time. But this is another lightweight matchup, rematch 6 years in the making, Dan Tom, because in 2014, Beneil Dariush went to Brazil, Dan Tom. He didn't do it in the States. He went to Brazil and beat Carlos Diego Ferreira in Brazil, handed him his first ever L. And since that point, I mean, both these guys have seen what the ups and the downs of the sport look like. I mean, Beneil Dariush made it all the way to number 5 in the world when he beat Michael Johnson. I don't know if you recall, but at the time, Michael Johnson was the number 5 guy on planet Earth. In my book, you beat the number 5 guy, you are the number 5 guy. I don't give a shit if it was controversial just because someone had a big bet on Johnson. To me, I mean, Dariush won 2 rounds of that fight, but we can talk about the scoring for that fight another time. The bottom line is I'm just trying to point out the heights that Dariush reached at one point. He reached top 5 status in my book. And now Carlos Diego, he's a top 10 guy in his own right. And Beneil is so resilient to a point where people were acting like Beneil Dariush was done when he had that little 3-fight stretch where things weren't going his way. And this guy reinvented himself. But the thing I want to point out when I say things like he reinvented himself, he was always good, Dan Tom. It's not like Beneil sucked and now Beneil's great. Like, Beneil's always been good. It's just when you're in the lightweight division and you're consistently fighting the best guys on planet Earth, not every fight is going to go your way. You're going to find times when you go in there against a guy like Edson Barboza, you win 7 minutes of that fight and then you get caught. There's going to be times where you might not be as motivated for some random no-name named Alex Hernandez who took the fight on 4 days short notice. You're like, who the fuck is this guy? I'm Beneil Dariush. You might get a little cocky. I mean, when you have that big of a sample size, Dan Tom, not every fight is going to go your way. And to take it a step further, Dan Tom, when you fight like Beneil Dariush fights, when you fight like a man like Beneil Dariush, and God, man, it sucks that term it doesn't mean what it used to mean, because now we got guys like Stephen A. Smith are ruining that term for everyone else. Guys, when I say fight like a man, I'm not taking away from the women. I'm a really old school guy. So when we say fight like a man, we just mean giving your best effort. That's what I mean when I say fight like a man. But Beneil Dariush, should I just say he fights with his balls? Because the guy definitely doesn't. I've never seen Beneil Dariush put his head between a man's legs and boo the crowd to sleep. I've never seen Beneil Dariush go out there and people be like, man, I really hated that Beneil Dariush fight. And same thing with Carlos Diego. He's a third-degree black belt. Both these guys are all-star black belts. I mean, I know Dan Tom remembers the Kron Gracie versus Beneil Dariush match back in the day. I know Dan Tom has seen what Diego Ferreira did to Gary Tonin on the mats back in the day, and to what's his name? Gordon. The fuck Gordon guy. What's his name?
Ryan?
Yeah, him. You know his like whole thing is like, isn't it like fuck Ryan or some shit? Like his hashtag is
Something like that.
like
Something
fuck
like that.
Gordon
Yeah,
Ryan. I
yeah.
don't know why. He's a great jujitsu guy though, but he's kind of an interesting cat. But anyways, Diego beat that guy. Not in MMA, in jujitsu, Dan Tom. That's how damn good both these guys are at jujitsu. And I think if it hits the mat, we're in for a treat. And before someone sits here and is like, oh, Michael Chiesa submitted Benny Dariush. Guys, going into that fight, Beneil Dariush, like I said, when you have this big sample size, not every time is going to be your best night. And Beneil was like, oh, Michael Chiesa submitting me. Yeah, okay. That was probably the last thing on his mind during training camp. And also, if you see how that fight went down, Beneil was destroying him. Beneil got cocky. Beneil got caught. Shit happens. Whereas in this training camp, going into it, there is a risk of getting submitted because we're dealing with a third-degree black belt. So Beneil's not going to get caught off guard if Carlos takes his back or anything like that. Whereas when Chiesa took his back, it was kind of like, oh shit, I didn't expect to be here. Like, wait, this guy's on my back. I'm Beneil Dariush. You know what I mean? Whereas in this camp, it's like, hey, I know Diego is an amazing black belt. We're focusing extra on that part of our game. I think that now we're dealing with a mature. And he's always been humble, but the thing is, man, again, when you've had 20 fights in the UFC, you're going to see ups and downs. And same thing with Diego. You saw his Dustin Poirier fight, but look how he rebounded. These are two of the most resilient guys in the 55-pound division. And now they rematch 6 years later. Dan Tom, the first time Beneil actually kind of took this one to the mat, which not a lot of guys have the balls to do against Diego Ferreira. You saw what happened when Rustam took him down. Rustam got caught in some shit, and had the bell not rang, he would have been tapped out at the end of one of those rounds. I know you remember. It's a little bit different with these two. How do you see this kind of unfolding? Because I guess you got, the cardio, the output of Diego mixed with the third-degree black belt, and then you got kind of the power striking of Beneil Dariush mixed with his amazing black belt.
Dan, I don't feel like our analysis has been too far off, even if our picks have been different. But maybe this is the one where we're kind of heading in the same direction, because I dig what you're saying. And when you mention about like the wrestling thing, it's funny because I know you're trying to make the point, like you explained, that he's an action fighter, and I agree. But the funny part that I noticed, and which is key to, and apropos to this matchup, is he actually is really good wrestling. And Beneil kind of always had that. He just kind of built off of it, and as his game improved under Rafael Cordero, training with better guys like Rafael Dos Anjos, who is another southpaw, obviously. We saw Beneil Dariush develop that classic King's MMA southpaw striking game that he is and I don't use air quotes black belt to, throw shade. I'm just saying not everybody uses Muay Thai rankings, so I understand that. But yes, he is a black belt under someone who is pretty damn respectable under Rafael Cordero. So you could almost get worried, like, okay, has he fallen in love with his hands? Because a lot of people that I respect that not so much reminded me, because I forgot that these guys fought. Like, there's just so much MMA, right? But a lot of people that I respect, if they're not outright picking Carlos Diego Ferreira, they're favoring him to win, like the odds are. And I'm like, oh, okay. I like Fortis MMA. I like safe. There's a clear. Yeah, Carlos Diego Ferreira obviously lost to Dariush and is technically 0-2 against Southpaws. But yes, the other person aside from Dariush was Dustin Poirier, who we just mentioned, right? That loss certainly aged well. So you could certainly play that game, right? And there's no denying that since he wasn't with Saif Saud at least full time. I think it was just like his first camp, using the air quotes again, because kind of like this camp, he will still work in his own Carlos Diego Ferreira part, which is a different part of Texas, I believe. But then he'll finish up camp and or link up with Saif Saud for these. But since that Poirier fight, like, we've seen a better Ferreira process around winner. So if you look at their first fight and you look at, okay, Ferreira, which, by the way, again, not to play revisionist history, but Ferreira took that fight on short notice, right? So you got to remember that. And basically, in short, Ferreira kind of flurries early. But Dariush, to your point and my point that I'm making with the wrestling, and your point with the top jiu-jitsu, Dan, is that Dariush took over the fight from there, right? Now, I could totally see people, maybe that's why he's favored, Dan. I could totally see the path or the logic thinking, okay, Dariush is a badass, but he's been falling in love with the striking. And what if he doesn't knock Carlos Diego Ferreira out? And, we've seen Dariush gas, even though Dariush is a do or die. I don't think he's ever lost a decision. He's either went to the draw with Dunham or he's won every decision that Dariush has ever been a part of, by the
Facts.
way. Yeah. But I could totally see if like that's kind of the logic behind a Carlos Diego Ferreira pick. He survives the storm and that safe Sayud cornering, adjusting, that output, that process. Cool, I get you. However, I would be careful of ranking their things because Pettis, I don't want to play the game where it's really unfair to discredit Pettis, but let's be honest. Pettis can be super inconsistent. And that was a really bad matchup from, a pressure standpoint, a pressure fighter like that. Styles make fights. And okay, ties him off is like a super impressive one. And maybe Khabilov, not as much. Khabilov's weird. Like he doesn't get as much credit as I think maybe he could get deserves because he's a decision guy. But if you have a Russian win on your record, everyone's like, oh, this guy beat a Russian. And I don't know about you, Dan, but I feel like Beneil Dariush's one win over Rashid Magomedov is worth more than both Carlos Diego Ferreira's win over Mairbek Taisumov and Khabilov. I've also been someone who's been kind of feeling like Mairbek Taisomov's been overinflated. And I feel like that's kind of been proven. And even if it hasn't, it doesn't matter because it's a losing scoreboard because, it sucks. I'm not shitting on Taisumov, but he pissed away the prime of his career. Facts. And he's always been overinflated. That's just, to me, facts. You look at the odds that he's gotten. So Rashid Magomedov does not get enough credit. He's more of a striker on paper, but like American Top Team credit him as one of the best wrestlers in the room, regardless of weight class. One of the best savviest counter strikers. And what Beneil Dariush was able to do in that fight, was really impressive. You really got to be a big hitter, secondly, to get Dariush out of there. So I'm looking at this fight, Dan, and I'm like, man, from Robbie Lawler's rematch, disrespecting him and making him the underdog. I hate when they disrespect these proven guys, these southpaw fucking sluggers who I love, and they make them underdogs in matchups they already won. I never understand that. So out of principle, I'm going to go with Dariush, but not even out of principle, Dan. Stylistically, again, the small cage, surprisingly, I don't think any of these guys have fought in the small cage unless, Dan, were you at that Rockhold Costa Philippou in Atlanta, Georgia fight where Charlie Brenneman
I was at Beneil Dariush's UFC debut when it was completely empty, and me and Shaq were the only people in the room, and he landed that big shot on Charlie, and you could hear it across the whole arena. I was there.
Do you remember the size of the cage? Was it the small one or a big one? That's the only spot. I think both their fights have been in the big cage. That's the only one I can't recall. Do you know about off the top of your head? It was a fight night, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was a small cage.
It looked like a big cage to me. I don't know.
Okay, that can make sense. But yeah, neither of them really have experience in the small cage. But if I were to guess, I would say the better wrestler and the better top guy is going to benefit, right? Also, they're both good pressure guys, but man, you want to talk about pressure strikers and southpaw strikers. I don't know, man. I give the checkbox to Dariush, so I don't know if that's where you're heading, Dan. I know a lot of times in these close matchups, you do tend to like the dog, and I don't blame you or anybody for that logic, by the way. But I too, or maybe not too, we'll see where you're going. But I'm going with the underdog here in Dariush.
Listen, you know how happy I am that you brought up the Rashid Magomedov fight, and not just because, he was the first guy in the UFC to beat Rashid. And for those that don't know, I'm not talking about PFL Rashid that's 38 years old. I'm talking about in his prime, the guy that beat Gilbert Durinho, the guy that was one of the scariest stone-faced Russians in the UFC at the time. So, Dan Tom.
Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah, he beat Rashid Magomedov by decision. One doesn't simply do that. But how about this? How about the fact that everybody criticizes Beneil Dariush's cardio? And where was that fight, Dan Tom? That fight was in the Mexico Elevation.
Yes.
So I don't want to hear any bullshit about Beneil Dariush's cardio. I think it was more of a pacing thing. Look, he had Evan Dunham hurt. He got excited. Shit happens. Sometimes you blow your load when you get excited. And that's what happened. I don't think he's making that mistake again. I think he's learned from them. And I love Diego as well. It's just that when I have a 50-50 fight and it's not lying like a 50-50 fight, well, I'm going with the underdog. I mean, I can make the case for both guys, Dan Tom. If I want to make the case for Carlos, all I got to talk about is then I'll start to bring up, hey, maybe his pace is too much for Benny. Maybe he can avoid getting finished and kind of outwork Benny, outpace him, see if Benny starts to slow down. Carlos has definitely developed his boxing. And then the case for Benny, well, we've already seen him take down Carlos. And I know Carlos has improved a lot. I know, now he goes by Diego, but his name's Carlos. But anyways, I know Carlos, that was 6 years ago, and people think he's improved. He has improved, but he still got taken down by Rustam more than once. And the reason I bring that up, Dan Tom, is because that opening is still there for Benny. The difference is Benny isn't just some, meathead wrestler that's going to give up his neck. I think Benny knows how to hold that top position. He knows about bicep control. He's not going to just give up his back to a guy as good as Carlos Diego. This isn't the Chiesa fight anymore where he was in there cocky off a huge win streak. Was like Chiesa, like Chiesa used to be the guy, like people would they'd kind of laugh when they got the call to fight Chiesa back at 55. You remember the kind of shit Kevin Lee was talking. You remember how Anthony Pettis couldn't have any consistency to save his life at that one point. But then he goes in there against Chiesa and he looks like fucking world champ again. So towards Chiesa's 55 run, towards the latter part of it, people weren't taking him as serious, and Benny didn't take him serious. Benny paid the price. I think we're dealing with a mature Benny Dariush, just like we're dealing with a mature Carlos. It could go either way, but I'll go with the dog. So let's see Benny Dariush come out here from that southpaw stance, fire that liver kick, mix in takedowns, swing some big ball. Look, the thing about this fight, one thing I can promise, it's going to be a real fight, Dan Tom. Yeah. Either guy can get knocked out. Anytime you have Beneil Dariush fighting, it's guaranteed violence. And Carlos Diego is the same thing. So these are two studs, two guys that I got so much admiration for. I mean, after Carlos Diego knocked out Ramsey Nijem, I bought his shirt. You know what I mean? I got the old school Carlos Diego shirt with the Brazilian flag, the American flag, and the Mexican flag. And then I've seen Beneil Dariush fight live 3 times, and he's won all 3 times when I was in attendance. The debut against Charlie Brenneman that you referred to, the Michael Johnson fight in Nashville, the James Vick fight in LA. And by the way, shout out to my boy James Vick, because it's always awesome when fighters know when to say when, and they don't stick around too long like Chuck Liddell, and they don't come back saying, oh, I just got caught. Vic was like, you know what, man, this ain't like failing a test or losing a basketball game. When you lose here, shit can be permanent. So he said, you know what, it's time to move on. So much respect to Vic for knowing when to say when. But I was still in attendance when Dariush beat Vic, and at the time that was a massive win, Dan Tom. I mean, Vic was undefeated at the time. Yeah. So Beneil's been having big wins his whole career. I know you remember when he beat Jim Miller back in the day, the same night that Max Holloway beat Cub Swanson, same night that OSP beat Patrick Cummins. I know you remember all these times that Beneil Dariush has had inside the octagon, and the run he's on right now. I mean, you see how he's handing out these ass whippings. You see how he picked himself back up after that 3-fight, not skid because one was a draw, but 3-fight, winless streak. The dude's been doing his thing. But that's not to take away from Diego, because Diego is the kind of black belt that he'll take your back. He doesn't even need to choke you out. He'll tie your arm behind your back and pound you out. Now he's developing the knockout power on the feet too. He can put people down. He's always been a spectacular guy as well. And what I love about Diego is that we're not going to sit here and talk about how Diego has this big vertical jump, or how Diego, has the fastest, whatever meter dash, or, it's not his athleticism. This guy purely got into the position he's in off his will and his technique. That's pretty fucking admirable, Dan Tom. That's what martial arts is all about, because you don't look at, if you didn't know Diego was a fighter, it's not like you look at Francis Ngannou and you shit your pants. You know what I mean? You look at Diego Ferreira, you're like, oh, hey, professor, you know what I'm saying? But then you watch him fight, and the dude's a killer. So, and same thing with Beneil. He's kind of unassuming too. That's what I love about both these guys. Yeah. These guys don't have to talk a lick of trash for me to be invested in this fight. Just the fact that it said Beneil Dariush versus Carlos Diego Ferreira, I'm in. They don't even have to say a single word. But if they get interviewed and I hear one of them be like, I'm going to finish Beneil Dariush, or I'm going to finish Carlos Diego Ferreira, then the goosebumps come. Then you start getting super pumped. Then you're like, holy shit, this is going to be insane. But it's already going to be insane. 50-50 fight. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll go with the dog. So let's see if Benny can get it done.
Yeah, man, you said it really well, and I'm excited for this fight regardless too. And don't let it get don't let Benny's gray hair fool you. The guy's only 31, folks. And I know, and I know, speaking of strength and conditioning improvements, man, I know Carlos Diego Ferreira has been seeing the right people and putting the work, and he looks fantastic. But he's 36, so don't let the age thing fool you either. And again, not shitting on. I'm the guy picking Edgar and Overeem, and I'm going to be 36 this year. So believe me, that is not shade. I'm just saying, don't judge books by its cover. It can get you in trouble either way in this matchup.
I mean, Diego looks so good, you would have thought he was training in Brazil. You know what I mean, Dan Tom? But over at Fortis MMA, they really have it down pat right now. Their system is in place, and I think he's one of their most promising fighters. So I just see this being an epic fight that could go either way. May the best man win. I just cannot wait. I mean, Benny versus Diego. This is going to be sick, man.
Can't wait either.
Well, Dan Tom, I want to thank you for joining me on this special edition of the Line Movement MMA betting show for Volkov versus Overeem. It's going on this Saturday at the Apex in Las Vegas. They can follow you at Dan Tom MMA. They can follow me at Best Fight Picks. Make sure y'all go to linemovement.com. Follow Line Movement at line_movement. Make sure y'all give this video a like, a subscribe. Also, we're on Apple Podcasts, on iTunes, Line Movement MMA betting show. And plus, all the other Line Movement shows are up there as well, too. So you can check out James Lynch. You can check out my boy, the Kipper. You know, the Kipper's holding it down for Line Movement. So a lot of great content at linemovement.com. Want to give a quick shout out to everybody behind the scenes. Our producer, Jordan. Thank you very much, Jordan. It's good to be back here another week talking fights. I know we got 8 straight coming up, so it's good to be back with my boy Jordan. Everybody else behind the scenes, Joe, Dan, Nick, Brian, James Lynch. Thank you all as well. Truly appreciate it, and look forward to talking more fights with everybody. So stay safe, enjoy the fights, and we will speak soon. What's up, Line Movement fam? If you liked what you saw, make sure you click any of the videos on the screen and subscribe to Line Movement today.